When does a human being begin? A philosophical journey into consciousness, birth, and the origins of the self. Most stories about death and rebirth begin at the wrong place. They begin at the moment when the heart stops, or when the body takes its first breath. But philosophy asks a more unsettling question, one that science alone cannot fully answer. When does a human being truly begin? Not biologically, but existentially. Not as a body, but as a self. And even more unsettling still, where does the temperament we carry through our entire lives actually come from? This lecture is not an attempt to persuade you to believe in reincarnation, nor is it an invitation into mysticism for its own sake. It is rather a philosophical inquiry, one that uses an ancient text, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, as a conceptual lens through which to examine consciousness, identity, and human disposition. In that text, death is not treated as an ending. It is described as a process, a gradual transformation of awareness. And if death is a process, then birth is not an accident. It is not a blank slate. It is a continuation. From this perspective, conception is not the beginning of consciousness, but the moment consciousness enters a new context. And it is in the silent, hidden, pre-verbal stage of fetal life that the foundations of temperament begin to form. Long before language, long before memory, long before moral reasoning, we do not begin life neutral. Some of us arrive wary of the world. Some arrive trusting. Some are born with inexplicable anxiety, anger, or sorrow. Others with a quiet warmth they cannot explain. Genetics alone does not answer this. Environment alone does not answer this. Chance alone does not answer this. What if temperament is not destiny, but a map? A record of emotional tendencies formed at the intersection of consciousness, experience, and choice before we ever open our eyes. This lecture invites you to look at your own emotional patterns, not with judgment, but with understanding. Not to blame your parents, not to romanticize the past, but to recognize that what was formed unconsciously can be transformed consciously. Because temperament is not a prison, it is orientation, and understanding that orientation is the first step toward freedom. Awakening in darkness, the first sensation of existence. I awaken not into light, but into awareness. There is no body, no name, no history, and yet there is no doubt. I am. This is not sleep. This is not dream. This is the continuity of consciousness after dissolution. There is no sound, no color, no form, and then warmth. Not metaphorical warmth, not symbolic comfort, a physical, enveloping presence. The darkness reveals itself not as emptiness, but as enclosure, not as void, but as belonging. I do not learn where I am. I recognize it. This is a womb. I have never studied biology, yet the rhythm tells me everything I need to know. The slow pulse, deep, repetitive, cosmic in its regularity, is not merely a heartbeat. It is an announcement. A new life context has begun, and within that moment, something stirs. A subtle vibration, almost imperceptible. It is not memory in the narrative sense. There are no images, no scenes. It is residue, a momentum carried forward. In Buddhist philosophy, this is called habit energy, the accumulated tendencies of consciousness. Not who I was, but how I was. And I understand without language that this vibration will become my emotional baseline, my instinctive reactions, my default posture toward the world. This is how temperament is born. When mind acquires form, at first, everything is indistinct. Consciousness exists like fog, present but unbound. There is no body yet, only potential. But slowly, the fog begins to condense. Each fluctuation of awareness leaves a trace, and the body follows. A bud that will become an arm, a suggestion of a spine, a pulse that will become a heart. The body does not precede the mind. It responds to it. Calm tendencies soften the rhythm of growth. Restless tendencies sharpen sensitivity. Fear tightens. Trust relaxes. This is not moral judgment. It is structure. The mind shapes the vessel it will inhabit. This principle governs the entire cycle of becoming, from birth to death, and from death to birth again. The imprinting of emotion. In adulthood, emotions are filtered through narrative. In the womb, they are raw, untranslated, unbuffered. The emotional state of the mother is not observed, it is absorbed. Peace arrives as still water. Anxiety arrives as turbulence. The fetus does not interpret, it synchronizes. Fear becomes fear. Calm becomes calm. This is where emotional orientation begins. Not as trauma, not as blame, but as resonance. If the surrounding emotional field is unstable, the emerging consciousness learns vigilance. If the field is gentle, the consciousness learns trust. This is not fate. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be understood. Shadows from a previous life. Sometimes emotion arises without cause. A sadness with no story. Anger without an object. These are not memory. They are emotional echoes. Unresolved tendencies carried forward. Seeking integration. In this life, sadness may become empathy. Anger may become discipline. What was unfinished becomes material, not punishment, not reward, but opportunity. The dreams of the unborn. Even without eyes, consciousness dreams. Symbols rise and dissolve. A hand held. A life oriented toward relationship. A solitary path beneath the sun. A life shaped by independence. A light in darkness. A life drawn toward meaning. These visions are not prophecy. They are directional indicators. The psyche setting its compass. This is how reincarnation configures temperament. Not by decree, but by alignment. This is a story about a fetus, but it is also a story about you, your fears, your patterns, your emotional reflexes. Understanding their origins does not bind you to them. It liberates you from confusion, because the moment you see how a tendency was formed, you gain the power to choose differently. And that choice, conscious, deliberate, awake, is where a human being truly begins. Temperament is not fate, but it is direction. A philosophical reflection on birth, choice, and the becoming of the self. Let us begin by correcting a common misunderstanding. Temperament is not fate. It does not shackle us to a predetermined future, nor does it sentence us to repeat the same emotional failures forever. And yet, temperament is not meaningless. It is direction. It is the first wind that fills the sails of a life before the captain ever touches the wheel. In the womb, nothing is yet decided, but something has already begun. A fetus formed within emotional turbulence often grows into an adult who longs, sometimes desperately, for stability. A fetus carried in emotional warmth often becomes someone who trusts more easily, who assumes connection rather than threat. This is not destiny. It is orientation. In Buddhist philosophy, karmic tendencies do not disappear at death. They do not reincarnate as fixed outcomes. They are reworked, reshaped as consciousness encounters a new body, a new context, a new world. From this perspective, the fetal stage is not passive waiting. It is an active recalibration, a moment when the soul, or if you prefer, consciousness, adjusts its internal compass before stepping once again into time. I had not been born yet. I was already me. I had never seen the world. I had never spoken a word, never touched another hand, never formed a memory. And yet, I was already myself. I had inclinations. I had aversions. I felt attraction and fear. None of these appeared suddenly at birth. They were not activated by light or air or sound. They were being assembled quietly, piece by piece. Here, in the darkness, I was preparing for a new voyage across the ocean of becoming. And slowly, unmistakably, I sensed it. The body was nearing completion. Consciousness was narrowing, learning to inhabit limits. Time, which had once felt vast and unstructured, was beginning to tighten. Birth was approaching, when the heartbeat becomes the center of the world. At some point, I was no longer floating as awareness alone. I was connected, not metaphorically, biologically, rhythmically, existentially. At first, the sound was faint, a distant vibration. Then, day by day, it grew stronger. Thump, thump. In the darkness, that rhythm became everything. It was not merely a heart. It was assurance. As long as it continued, I existed safely. Without words, it spoke. You are not alone. I began to align myself to that rhythm, to time my own becoming to its pulse. Fingers formed, limbs extended, density replaced fluidity. I was no longer wind passing through darkness. I was becoming a being capable of movement, of resistance, of presence. I was becoming someone who would live here. When the mother's emotions become light, emotions did not arrive as concepts. They arrived as color. On days of sorrow, a deep blue filled the womb. On days of joy, a gentle gold illuminated the space. On anxious days, a soft gray mist hovered everywhere. I did not analyze these sensations. I absorbed them without language. I understood something essential: how fragile human beings are, how incomplete, how profoundly beautiful in that incompleteness. Long before birth, I was learning what it meant to be human, and I understood many of the tendencies I would carry into life were already being shaped here. Repeated gentleness would soften me. Prolonged anxiety would sharpen my sensitivity. Birth, I realized, was not the beginning of personality. It was merely the moment personality became visible, the first sound of the outside world. One day, something changed. A sound arrived that did not belong to this enclosed universe. Voices, distant, laughter, objects colliding. At first, it disoriented me. Then, understanding dawned. There is another world. I imagined it without images. Would it be warm? Would it be harsh? Would anyone be waiting? Sometimes the sounds felt musical, sometimes chaotic, but always they pulled me forward. Even before seeing it, the unknown world was inviting me. The final configuration of temperament. Near the end, something subtle but decisive occurred. Within the darkness, possibilities appeared, not as images, but as inclinations, paths, directions, modes of being. I felt a pull toward one configuration of self over countless others, not because it was assigned, not because it was imposed, but because it resonated with the deepest unresolved longing I carried. This was not fate being chosen for me. It was choice being made by me. In that moment, I understood. I had already decided how I would love, how I would fear, how I would meet the world. Not in detail, but in direction. The last silence before birth, the womb had become familiar. And yet, it was changing. Pressure increased, orientation shifted, attention filled the space, the body preparing to release me. And in that narrowing silence, I made a quiet decision. Yes, I will go. There was fear. There was anticipation. There was a hope without language. But stronger than all of these was the sense that nothing ahead was arbitrary. This was not a destiny imposed. It was a path I had been preparing to walk, moving toward light. The force intensified. Like a wave, it carried me forward. And then, for the first time, light. Not blinding, not violent, but unmistakable. The opening scene of a life I would spend years trying to understand. In that final instant before breath, I whispered without sound, "Please be kind to me, new world." And with that, the next chapter began. This is a story about birth, but it is also a story about you, your anxieties, your relational patterns, your emotional reflexes. Temperament is not your fate, but it is the direction from which you began. And once you understand that direction, you gain the freedom to choose a new one. If this journey has deepened how you think about life and death, about where we come from and how we become who we are, I invite you to continue walking this path with me. Please subscribe, like, and enable notifications so we can explore the next chapter together. Your attention keeps this inquiry alive. Thank you for sharing this moment.